So one of the things that we like to seek to do each year at the forum is to explain to you what we have been working on over the year across the initiative, as well as explain where we think the initiative is going to head over the next 1 to 2 years. We do this through our conference workshops around the template and the new technologies around the platform, and as well as this presentation, which is more aimed at the AEC strategy, construction sector strategy, particularly as it relates to design and construction, but moving forward more broadly around the whole of life strategies for the built environment. Last year, the feedback that we received was that the forum was the best that we'd ever delivered. And from our perspective, we were able to present for the first time really the ductwork design to fabrication workflow, and also the integration of the template into PowerCAD, which were two very significant steps forward in terms of the initiative and the overall vision. But what was also really significant on reflection was the clear focus of many of the presenters on their digital strategies, data and data analytics. So we've taken that on board in terms of our thinking around the end game for this initiative, and we think that that over the next couple of years, what we do is really, really important. So the decisions that we make this year and next year in terms of the initiative and what the industry does will really shape the future of building information management and building information modelling. So what I'd like to do first, and before I get to the actual strategies that we're looking to implement, is to explain some of the important trends that we're seeing from our perspective, and also to talk a little bit about the things that we're really, particularly in Australia, we're really not quite nailing. So hopefully that will help shape where we move over the next 6 to 12 months and really get benefit out of BIM moving forward. So welcome to the BIM-MEPAUS initiative forum. So the great thing about Australia is that, I've put this flag up a few times, is that the really great thing about Australia is that we tend to look to the US and to the UK for what's happening there in terms of our strategy development. And I think what we've seen over the years from the US is that the US are really strong at getting the job built. So their focus has always been, so it seems, around the technology about actually getting the projects built. Whereas when you look at the UK, they've probably taken as a country a much more strategic view around national standards and to actually implement BIM as a point of national competitive advantage. Over the years, we've brought some of the biggest names in the US contracting side to this forum. And what's been really clear with these companies is that they've got a very, very strong focus on measuring the efficiency of their materials and their labour effectiveness. Whereas when you look at the UK have always been, it seems, more focused on the design side of things. So what's really interesting when you look at where the US is heading over the last 3 to 4 years, if you look at this curve, and Chris Pratt was kind enough to lend it to me, is that you look at their move towards off-site fabrication, and that trend is about an 80% increase both in terms of output and productivity. So that gives a really strong indication of where the US is heading in terms of their move to get their risk mitigated through this off-site fabrication strategy. This is probably one of the best examples. So this is US engineering, And we had Tim Moormeyer present a couple of years ago. But what's happened here is that one of the largest data centre operators in the US has actually engaged US engineering to basically off-site fabricate 10 whole data centres for them. But what's really interesting about what the client's done there is that they've actually spent a year working with US engineering to firstly optimise the design and actually get the manufacturing system sorted out so that when they actually go to build these data centres, they're assured that they're going to get an efficient delivery. So a number of clients in the US, I think what you're starting to see is that they are actually sorting out their supply chain and starting to work with their supply chains quite differently. The other thing that you're starting to see the US talk about is, so for a long time the discussion's been around the efficiency of labour, resources, and how they optimise that. But a number of the leading US firms are really moving from that sort of lean focus on production efficiency to actually lean business cultures. And firms like Southland Industries and the like, what they're actually starting to do is think about their culture and how they actually organise themselves and their teams and how they work together with their supply chain to actually really get that next step in performance. So when you look at a firm like Southland Industries, one of the things that they're doing in each of their facilities is redesigning their facilities around making collaborative workspaces. And the other thing that they're really focusing on is these virtual build centres. So whereas we tend to talk about we're going to go and do the construction documentation, what they actually do is that they're bringing their designers, their modellers, their shop drawers, their engineers, clients into an environment where they can actually effectively collaborate together. And I think this is really pointing to where we actually need to head to as an industry. So if we cross the Atlantic and we go to the UK, it's many of the things are similar in terms of their thinking, but what you do tend to see is this really high-level strategy effectively led by government and by industry around building this national BIM capability. So I've put out a lot of standards, and this PAS 1192 is effectively almost becoming the global standard around the specification of building information management. But the other thing that we really need to do as a country is make a decision around which classification system we're going to go with. And it does seem that Uniclass, and often there's an advantage in terms of coming second, Uniclass does seem to have the thinking and the frameworks that actually support all sorts of things, or better support what we want to do as an industry. So universities, linear assets, Uniclass seems to go much further towards what we need than perhaps some of the older systems such as Omniclass. So I think from our perspective as an initiative, we'll probably be looking to align around Uniclass and the British standards moving forward. But the other really great thing that you see in the UK is government leadership. And one of the biggest projects that they're going to undertake over the next 10 years is the refurbishment of their Houses of Parliament. And the interesting thing there is that what they've done is the first thing that they've done is build a digital model. So they've done the biggest scan probably ever done in the UK, and that's actually their starting point for managing the whole of that project delivery process. So that combination of government support, exemplar projects, and the creation of standards is, I think, something that we should really, as a country, be trying to align around. In terms of Australians' capability, and we've been at this since 2010, it's really interesting to see how far we've progressed. So this is Everett Rogers' diffusion innovation curve, and probably most of you are fairly familiar with this. But the thing about this curve is, in those early adoption phases, you have the enthusiasts and the visionaries, and we've had a few of those at the conference. But the real thing is, can you get it from that early adopter stage into the early majority? And probably most of the people here in this audience are the pragmatists. So they're looking for proven, reliable and relatively simple technologies to use and platforms to use. But if you don't get from that early adopter phase, the innovation will fail. So this is a really good framework for actually understanding where we are as an industry. And when you look at BIM-based design, I think it's fairly fair to say that and I made a call about this a little bit too early, but I didn't think that we'd see another major project that wasn't delivered using a BIM platform. But certainly, in terms of take-up of BIM modelling for design, Australia's really embraced that and really, I think, in many respects, doing very well. In terms of our own business, about 85% of our work is now Revit MEP based, and I would expect in the next 1 to 2 years that it will be around 100%. In terms of the development of our Australian capability, this project, One Blind, was probably the project that started the initiative. So why I say that is because it was probably one of the first BIM-based design projects, and it had a BIM deliverable. And at the time, I know the president of the AMCA came and said, look, we've got a bit of an issue here because clients want these BIM as-built models, and how are we as the lead services on the project, how are we going to deliver that? And really, at the time in 2010, we weren't able to do that. Get to 2015, and Lend-Lease are probably into their second generation of BIM execution plan, and the industry is actually capable of delivering a BIM as-built model on Barangaroo. So it's quite significant progress there. Then you look at 2018, and the same project has some 140 BIM models for all of the tenancy fit-out floors. So when you look at that journey, that's quite significant progress over just effectively about an 8-year period. Probably at the next level is Christine's and Alistair Brooks presented at the forum last year around their BIM strategy for Queen's Wharf. And I suppose what's really interesting about that is both the maturity of that BIM execution plan, but as well, it's very clear from the start that 50% of it is probably about making sure that they're going to get their project built on time, on budget, and to the right quality. But the other 50% is how they're intending to use BIM to manage the asset and the facility. So it's one of the most mature, or is the most mature BIM execution plan I've seen in terms of its whole of life perspective. And really, probably that project's going to set the next BIM benchmark in terms of what BIM execution plans look like moving forward. In terms of the integrated model workflow, I think Australia is doing exceptionally well. So this idea that we have a single model that the designers develop, they then hand to the project team to then do the virtual build, and then to deliver it as an as-built model. I think Australia is probably a world leader in that space. When you look at projects like the ICC in Sydney, it's very difficult to imagine how a project of that size and that complexity could have been delivered in the time frame without the use of an integrated model workflow. It started with the designers in AECOM and the construction team working together on a single model, and then that model being developed through a virtual build process to actually deliver the project. And absolutely world leading, all done on one platform, so it was all done in Revit, MEP, and really just demonstrated a very significant capability, particularly around the PPP, to actually leverage these integrated workflows, which are at fundamentally the core of BIM-MEPAUS. So moving forward, constructible Revit. At the time when we started this initiative, we talked about constructible Revit, and everyone's going, well, what are you talking about? You know, like it's a design tool. But in 2018, and actually for a few years, constructible Revit's the real deal. So you can model piping in Revit and get it to the same accuracy as CAD-MEP. So the pipe was relatively straightforward in some senses, but over the last few years we've got the ductwork working, and it is now the real deal. So people understand the concept of constructible Revit and what that can actually bring to the projects. In terms of where the technology is going, the two technologies that people think about a lot is the total stations, and I suppose in some sense over the 8 years that we're probably into our second or third generation of the technologies. And not only are they becoming more affordable, but they're actually becoming easier to use. And one thing is the price point of the technology, but the second thing that's most important is actually the usability of the technology. So when the technology gets usable by the majority is when you actually see that really rapid takeoff. So Trimble's been around, or the total stations, for a long time, and a lot of people using them. I suppose the real advance over the last couple of years is around the site scanning technology, and certainly these sorts of technologies are really starting to change the way that people actually do, particularly that refurbishment type work, where they can scan a plant room and then model in constructible Revit. So that's really good, and people are really starting to leverage that sort of technology. The other thing that's really changed over the journey is the cloud and these ideas of platforms and apps. So in some sense, at the start, you think that the cloud and apps give you the ability to get this single point of truth at the point of use. But really, one of the advantages, particularly if you're running a large business, is the consistency of the delivery. So if someone has the app and you have 6 or 7 or 10 sites running, the consistency with which people do things can be really well managed through the use of these cloud-based applications. I suppose the other thing that's been interesting over the journey is just to see how platforms like Aconex have developed. So originally they started probably back in 2010 as a document management platform, a collaboration platform, and a bit of BIM. Now they're built to manage BIM models, but the other thing that's really interesting is how they're expanding out to provide all of these workflows for different things such as quality management and safety and those sorts of things. What's really interesting about the Oracle acquisition of Aconex is that linking of what's happening in the construction sector to actually people's ERP systems. And you can really see a long-term position there. I think what will be interesting over the next 1 to 2 years is which of those platforms are the ones that actually end up being the major players. So generally these things, as you know, whether it's Netflix or Amazon or Facebook, what tends to happen is that you tend to get the consolidation into single industry platforms. So moving forward, we've also seen really great work in terms of and support by the industry around content. And BIM-MEPAUS, the content site, is really growing with time and working well. But what's really interesting, I think, in Australia is just how some of these manufacturers are actually integrating BIM within their overall sales strategy and platforms. So Hollyoaks have really been a strong supporter and has a really fantastic website. But if you look at what Fantech have been able to do in terms of integrating BIM to their selection software, again, you don't tend to see so much of this overseas. So we've been really early adopters in terms of that BIM content strategy globally. So we've come a long way. But really, what's really clear now is that there's another next wave of disruption coming. And last year we had WeWork. People were talking about WeWork and how they were using analytics to optimise their facility management design. But probably even more significantly was that last month or the month before, there was a conference in Sydney, Intelligent Buildings. And what's really clear in the market is that whether they're big tertiary education sectors or owners, or they're the big property owners, they're really getting into asset management analytics. And so to do that, what they really need is big data. So data analytics and artificial intelligence are now really starting to shape what we need to deliver from the construction sector to building owners. A few years ago at the conference, Tyler Goss mentioned that ultimately everything gets compared to Excel, but that's probably not the case in 2018. We had Shane Berger last year saying, I can't believe it, we've actually got mathematicians working in our business now to help us with architectural design. So that's going to be a significant influencer in terms of where we head as a BIM strategy nationally. So I've modified this curve a little bit. So now the sceptics are the departed, and it's not quite as evenly balanced, but probably that's actually the situation. And what you see is that BIM and digital design, in my view, are really in the late majority stage of adoption. What we could see in digital asset management and facility management is that over the next 2025, then in actual fact that becomes standard practice, and when we're building projects for these big property owners, they will want the asset data, and it won't be, oh, so we sort of want it, they'll really want it. So we need to be able to deliver that. The real challenge in a sense is where we are in terms of digital and BIM construction. So I think we're certainly past the chasm, but we're probably not as progressed as what we really need to be. And the other big thing that a lot of people talk about and sort of know is that in terms of asset management, what's actually happening is when you look at the platforms that are doing the asset management, they're not actually tending to use COBie in the way that perhaps we might imagine. The other thing though that's really clear is we've got to change our view as an industry about we get paid to put stuff up, we don't get paid to write about it. Moving forward, the delivery of that digital twin will be really, really important from a client's perspective. So it's also important that we recognise some significant challenges in the road ahead. So the first thing that we know is that we've got a huge construction boom coming in Australia. So not only have we got a huge amount of infrastructure work, catch-up infrastructure work that's getting done, particularly around tunnels and those sorts of things, but we're also seeing a huge wave of work in terms of commercial construction, data centres, hospitals and healthcare. So how we deliver that is going to be a real challenge for the industry. And there's really an elephant in the room, and that is that if we have all this great technology and we have all these great practices, why isn't it business as usual in 2018? And I think that's the real thing that we've got to ask ourselves. So two statements around that is, it's pretty clear when you look at the exemplar projects that the future's already here, but the consistency of the implementation is not. It's just not evenly distributed. Even at a tier 1 level, you can go with one tier 1 contractor or head contractor, and it can get done on one way on one project, another way completely differently. What the industry really needs is to know that when you go and work with a head contractor, that's the way that they're going to deliver it, and you can bank on that methodology. The other thing is that, and you don't really need to be Albert Einstein to work this out, but eminently so, is that we can't solve these problems that we've got with the same thinking that we've used to create them. So we do actually need to have a bit of a hard chat about a few things, and one of those, the locals get it, is that we haven't really yet committed to the virtual build. Not like they've done in the US, and probably not like they've done in the UK. So we've got this really good platform, we've got this integrated model workflow working better than just about anywhere. And the concept really is that, you know, this design model, we get this design model, whatever level of development it is, and then we virtually build it. And once we've got that construction model, that's what we're going to use as the platform to actually execute the delivery. The only thing, or the thing though, is that the virtual build actually takes time, and you actually have to organise to get that done. And in some sense, almost the virtual build is more complex than the site execution. So the projects that are executing these virtual builds really, really well are delivering outstanding results. Where this virtual build approach is not being used, it's almost business as usual and as painful as always. So I went to the US back in 2010, and what was really interesting there was, and I've shown this photo before, is this is Mission Bay Hospital in San Francisco. 2 years of a recession, Broadway Mechanical, they had a team of about 20 drafters, modellers, and there were 2 left, and they had 1 project to do. And they moved those people down to the site, and they built this virtual build team, and the whole team was driven by the dates of the construction pour. And the whole team were focused on resolving the design and their construction models so that they could get their top deck hangers in. So that's not just mech, that's mech, plumbing, electrical, all of the trades, fire, everyone is working on that top deck to get all of their hangers in so that when it came to the floor below, they had an execution plan how they were going to get that efficiently built without having to climb over each other and things going in and out of sequence and all the rest of it. But the whole basically on their knees, the one thing that they decided to do was sort out their virtual build strategy and get their hangers into the top deck. So there's a message in that. So what's the difference between virtual build and what we do? So the thing is that under the current paradigm, what we tend to do quite often is that we tend to think about it as a shot drawing coordination process, and often we appoint the trades very late and we're not really quite committed to it in the way that you certainly see in the US. If you want to actually move forward, what we really have to do is commit to this virtual build and commit to it in a way that it actually leads the construction on site. We need to get from this idea that we're doing a coordination process to that we actually have a team led by a virtual build leader who actually builds this project off-site for then delivery by the rest of the project team. We really need to get that early engagement of the trades to actually allow all of that to happen. When we make that shift as an industry, we'll be in a very, very different place. So just as an example, I was fortunate enough to be involved in the Health Innovation Building in South Australia. And this project, in terms of the density of its services and the complexity of its services, is probably the most complex project that's been delivered in Australia in the last couple of years. The client had a major issue in terms of when it needed to be opened and the complexity of the services and the tenant requirements in this building. So it's got everything. Every conceivable piece of plant or type of system is in this building, and to a level that you don't typically see. So in terms of how the client dealt with it, it was really interesting when we had the debrief. So the first thing that they did was that they said, well, we've got to get the procurement model right. So they went for the construction management procurement model. They appointed HY. And the really interesting thing about HY was then they said, oh, look at the complexity of this project. We've got to get the right partners involved in the project team to actually deliver this project and get the required outcome. But the other thing that the team did was commit to the virtual build. And these things don't need to be like a Southland Industries level of implementation. But this is O'Connor's office. And here they're building the building. They've got the mech, elect, fire, hydraulics contractors all in the same room, and they're building this building before they're actually going to deliver it on site. And one of the things was that at the start of this process, a couple of the trades said, oh, well, we don't do BIM, we haven't got it. But what HY did was insist that they actually bring the capability to the project to do it. In terms of the model, that was the model that was actually built. The other interesting thing about the model was that it was actually used quite extensively for different sort of sessions with clients in terms of actually showing them what they're getting and fine-tuning the actual layout of some of the labs and stuff like that. And what actually happened then was that it went in exactly as per the model, the constructible model. So lots and lots of things were resolved in that modelling stage. So you can see all of the plant that has to be accessed is all accessible from the walkways. All these sorts of things were resolved. What was really impressive though was that when they got under program pressure, so that's nothing new, 3 floors of about this complexity got delivered in and installed in about 12 weeks. So to do that, they actually had to have the two of the largest duct manufacturing facilities in the country actually building off the same model and delivering to site in a required sequence. So what was actually achieved on that project was incredible, and what that was worth to the client was amazing. So when you see things like that, projects work so successfully, you go, well, why aren't we doing this as business as usual? In terms of the framework for the 21st century, I really believe this is it. So this is, used to talk about BIM being this thing that sort of supports everything around the whole the building life cycle, which is true. But really BIM is that central piece that supports better collaboration, lean project delivery and digital strategy. Everything works better, whether it's digital, lean or collaboration, with BIM sitting in the middle of it. So that framework, in terms of whatever you're thinking about, is a really good framework to think about how am I connecting these circles and how am I leveraging each of those interfaces. In terms of how we do that, it really, really matters. So in terms of the initiative and what we're doing, in terms of the development roadmap, again, we need to have a bit of a chat, but I think the future's now in 2018 is becoming pretty clear. And what we do next really does matter. So we've got some really important milestones out of the way and some really important capabilities that we've built. So one of the things is when you start to get into this portfolio level asset management analytics, naming conventions are really, really important. And what's starting to become evident is that without discipline around naming conventions, to do portfolio level asset management is really, really complex. So for mechanical in particular, we've had a naming convention for quite some time. But if you link a name and then a model component type, so if the type might be a heating water unit, the subtype might be it's a atmospheric, then pretty much, and then you know the size, the approximate size, that's probably as much as almost that you need to know to do everything that you need from an asset management perspective. One of the things that we're going to do is we're just going to look at how our naming conventions and our tagging as to see how that works with Uniclass 2015 over the next month or two. The other thing that we really need is we really need to define these fields. So one of the most common things that people are looking for in asset management is how am I going to deal with this huge issue around refrigerant phase-outs. But when you start to look at things across a portfolio, what people actually call things is really, really important. So if you're building an asset management data collection app, you're almost certainly going to have pull-down fields so that you define a name. So if you take R22, we're working on one at the moment, there's about 22 ways that people call R22, and it almost makes it impossible to actually do it effectively. So really what we need to probably, in my view, is to see in our BIM platform is the ability to actually define those field ranges to get the consistency that we need from a whole of life perspective. The other thing that we want to do is that we've got the shared parameters, and a bit like Excel's no longer quite going to cut it. That's how we've been managing it to date. We're looking to develop a website service which will have all of the shared parameter names there and map to then to COBE where applicable. And this is a really good example of one that's sort of cloud sourced, but we'll probably bring a little bit more discipline to it. And we're looking to get that up sooner rather than later, because we know that that's very important from an industry standardisation perspective. The other thing that we've done a lot of work on is the integration of PowerCAD into the electrical motor side of things. So on the when you look at building electrical consumption, about 40% of it is through motors, and so that connection between the motor and the transformer is a really important line of sight. So the key has actually been around the VSD, and we've got a solution to that, and we want to probably progress that even further with Autodesk. But what it will allow us to do is to actually model motors, model harmonics, model power factors as a system, and actually do that as a fully integrated solution with PowerCAD moving forward. Finally, the other thing that we're doing is, it's interesting, probably come as much from the contractors as it's come from the consultants, is to actually develop our fabrication parts for cable trays. So in some sense, cable trays are a little bit, well, they're not quite, but they're similar to pipe and duct. But what we're also looking to do is to integrate PowerCAD into the sizing of the cable trays, so that when we put the cables on there, it will actually give us the correct sizing and the correct spacing. So, as I said, interesting. Quite a bit of the requests for this capability is actually coming from the design firms, as much as the contractors. We're getting on with the fire side of things. So we've signed an MOU with the FPA, and that's a piece of work that's going to be starting in the next 3 to 4 months. Around, in the first instance, is to get the naming conventions, and then to get the component libraries built. So, in terms of the vision, to finish up, as I said, there'll be the departed, but the real vision for 2025 is that, in terms of design, we think it'll be done and dusted in terms of the transition from CAD to BIM. In terms of digital construction and BIM, we'd like to see the same level of adoption and maturity. And in terms of asset management and digital asset management, we'd like to see all of those things at the same level of development. When we do that, we know that we've actually realised the vision of BIM that we had back in 2010. So in terms of the next, as I said, the next 3 or 4 months, there's quite a few things that we'll be doing to actually engage with industry to just sort out some of these things that I've been talking about. But if we get those in shape, we should be really in a good place to realise a lot of these long-term held visions. So, as I said, what we do next is really important. So I hope you enjoy the conference. I'm sure you're going to hear a lot of great presentations, and hopefully through all of that, you'll be able to build your strategies around where you head over the next 1 to 2 years. So thanks very much.